Welcome everyone to a Kings of War list review. This is your host, Visibly Riley, and today I thought I'd run through my 2250 Ogres list that I will be running this weekend, June 9th and 10th, 2018, at Cascade Clash in Portland, Oregon. Now, a bit of a disclaimer, I've had a few beers to drink, but I wasn't able to actually procure a battle report this weekend as my opponents were slightly recalcitrant. Instead, we decided to down a couple pints, so you'll have to bear with me, especially if I get a little off topic here or there, as I'm honestly waiting for paint to dry on the last model I have to finish tonight before I go to bed. Here we see a clearer picture of my horde of Ogre Warriors. Now, this was the first unit I painted, and before I began this, I decided that each unit would have 5 models instead of the 6, partly because 6 models just felt a little formulaic, which I'll go into in a little bit, but also because I don't like the half plus one minimal model count that people do a lot in Kings of War. I think that it's a nice cost saving measure, but honestly, if you're trying to make your units look even presentable, then you need to go a little bit above and beyond and think more in volumetrics, which in this case, I decided to do 5 instead of 6 because 6 models makes it sort of stuck in that G-dub old school pose of everyone looking forward, everyone fits together, as these are Games Workshop models, and if there are 6 of them, they can't really turn without getting in each other's way. So 5 models is what I decided on. It also helps fill the volumetrics here where there's never a gap, right, where you can just see through them. I see that sometimes in especially things like chariot hordes where you see 2 chariots on 150 millimeters wide and it just looks empty. Um, so try to think about filling that in with something. It doesn't necessarily need to be more models, but you could do it with basing work, which is one of the things I've tried to do here, and I'll get into later. So starting with the painting here, I started with the upper left-hand guy with that young gentleman with that mace in front of his face, and I decided originally that I was going to go with an ultramarine blue on the gut plates and iron fists. I'll be using some G-dub terminology just to keep it easier for me and easier for a listener looking at these models in particular. But originally I decided to go with that ultramarine blue because I thought it would contrast well with the lower chroma skin and pants I was going to go with, as both are colder tones. I mixed blue into my shades with the skin, and then the pants are turquoise, which maybe you'll see a little bit later. But in the end, it was a little overpowering. I wanted the eye to rest in the center of the model towards the face, so that blue didn't really work out. So instead, I swapped, as you can see on the rest of the models, to this Luftwaffe blue, which is, most people will just see as gray. Trust me, in person, it's a bit more blue, but it's definitely very, very, very desaturated blue, and part of the reason I chose it is because it contrasts well with that rust effect I did under the paint. I decided to try a bunch of things with these painting on top of the fact that this is a quick army. I finished it in about 4 weeks, I would say. So I added a little chipping medium under it, did some quick rust effects, as an orange gradient with some asymmetrical brushwork, and then chipping effects, and then worked the Luftwaffe blue over that. It worked okay. One of the major things that I've realized is that a lot of your delicate layering will get destroyed when you try to chip off the paint if you're not careful. So I'm still working with that. We'll see how it moves on. You might notice that I've got a bit of some freehand, especially on that lower left-hand guy with the 2 triangles on his gut plate. Now, a lot of that was washed away, again, while I was trying to chip down to that orange layer, so it doesn't come through super great, and I'm not exactly sure how to solve that, but for a quick job, I'm okay with it. Lastly here, These models all came to me pre-assembled, which is very unfortunate as, oh boy, did they have mold lines. So many mold lines, and it's so hard to get. It's I don't know how you guys do it, but when I clean models, I clean them by the part, right? So I'll cut out, an arm, and then I'll clean the arm, then I'll put it down, cut out another arm, clean the arm, so on and so forth, and then I assemble it, right? If it's already assembled, I find it very hard to notice and even harder to clean these parts afterwards. So a lot of times I was, spraying these guys down like I did the beginning of the skin tone with my airbrush, and then it would just pick out these giant mold lines, and some of them I just have to let go because it would just be too much work to clean them up. Some of them I cut off and then tried to repaint. It's oof. Yeah, you'll see it as we go. Moving on, we see the first picture of, unfortunately, the unfinished unit of boomers I have here. Excuse me. Um, these guys, while it's unfortunate that they're not finished, they do show off the base work that I'm trying to do. So when I played Warhammer, and I mean, I've played Name a Game, and I've probably played it as it pertains to miniatures, but I've never been big on terrain or basing. So this time I decided, as Kings of War offers such a great opportunity with multi-basing, to try and mess around with that a bit. Now, these bases are built with an MDF base and then some foam, whether pink or just some packing foam, to add some skeletal layer. And then I covered it in this material called Sculptamold, which is basically a paper mache plaster mix. It's excellent. It dries super fast, unless you do what I did, which I'll explain in a second. On top of and then I mixed in some plastic scenery that I have from bits boxes on top of bark and some shale pieces to make the rock, and then a bit of lichen to add some life to the base. Now, what I meant by the sculptal mold dries really fast if you do it right is that I let it sit in my garage for a while, and some of you might not know this, but I live in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle to be exact, and it's not exactly dry up here, even even in the summer. So this did not dry in my garage at all. But the second I brought it inside, I mean, it was dry within minutes. So just check your humidity if you're going to mess with it. An extremely versatile material to work with. You can do some rudimentary sculpting, which I did not do as this was my first venture with it, but it can definitely hold a simple shape pretty well. You could make it look like rock face or make it look like dirt, whatever you really want with. I went with oatmeal because I am not good at this. So, secondly, you can see in the front there with the bit of lichen, and then next to it, that is actually a piece of cedar bark. We have a lot of cedar trees up here in the Pacific Northwest, so it's very cheap to get cedar bark and use it in your basing. I really recommend it. You can get a big old bag from whatever home improvement store you want to use for probably about $10, which is, it'll last you forever. Just make sure again that you dehydrate it. You want to make sure that it doesn't have any moisture in it when you start painting. Lastly, I decided to add a bit of this scattered debris with breaking up a piece of slate, which is an excellent idea. Oh my god, slate tiles are basically $0 to buy, and you just bash it with a hammer. You get some excellent shapes, excellent debris, super good. The only thing I don't like about it is that it's obviously you can't really drill into it, as all my models are pinned to their bases. So you need to be using a mixture of this bark and the slate to really get a great desired effect here. I mixed in a few plastic pieces just because I thought it would add a bit of visual interest. The bases, I don't think bases should overpower the model. I'm definitely not a base wars kind of a guy, but throwing in some hidden elements, like in the upper right hand corner, you can see the beginning of a pillar that plays into this. I thought that, ruined civilization, whatever. I haven't really written a story yet, but it plays pretty well. Some of the things I learned here is that I've got a bit of a hover feet problem, and I decided to fill that in by using just some caulk, right? Because it's nice and white, and then let it dry, give it a sprinkling of my snow effect, and it looks okay, but since I didn't use that snow effect later, it just kind of looks like the snow has piled under all my model's feet for some reason. So if you were thinking about, or specifically if I was, thinking about doing this army again, I'd probably pay a bit more attention to that, but since it's a quick army, I'm not super worried about it. Lastly, about the snow effect itself. Now, this was left over from a display board I did in, man, it must have been 2007, 2006, a long, long time ago for a friend of mine, Ryan Munsell, which you might actually see this display board later as I'm going to be using it in the tournament. So we'll see how it's fared over the years. But anyway, the point is, I still had some snow effect from way back then. Never throw out any bits. Be a hoarder. Best modeling example. But I still had some of this, and I decided to try it out because the only snow effects I really like the look of is from a company in the UK, and the shipping was more expensive than the product itself. So I just decided to use what I had at hand, and it looks all right. Kind of looks like my models or my bases are covered in asbestos, but you know, cheap is cheap. Here we see the first finished horde of boomers. Here, the cannons are a little bit different, as I wanted them to have a slight difference between unit and unit, just to make sure that I can just quickly point out and be like, the unit with the light cannons has X item, just for my opponent's convenience and my own. While painting these guys, this was actually the second unit I finished, and I decided to hold on, let's roll back for a second. The warriors here, you can see, are in a classic formation, right? They're sort of like a 5 on a die. The guy with the banner is in the middle. He's a little closer to the center, and then we have each of the 4 corners with an ogre warrior. I didn't want my army to look like that, though. So instead, each unit has a bit more individuality. So my boomers rise towards the top of the hill. Part of this, again, is to break up that profile, and part of it is because in the lower right-hand corner, I wasn't sure whether that was slate or bark, or how much, I guess, of which is which. So I didn't want to really drill into it, so I decided not to. Anyway, it worked out for the best. As for the painting on the boomers itself, the only thing different here is that they needed some flame effect, and then the cannons. The cannons did not take to the chipping. If anything, they took to the chipping even worse than the gut plates and the Iron Fist did. And I think it's, maybe it's the large open areas or whatever, but it killed all the highlights I did when I tried to wash it off, as, you had to use water for the chipping. So, I don't know, maybe it's easier to just brush on some chipping effect, but I really want this medium to work, and I feel like it's a user error problem and not a substance problem. So, we'll see. Here we see my 3 main characters, or the 3 warlock characters, with the 2 big gits in the back. I've since given them new bases so they don't have those goblin greens, but I painted those 2 wolf riders in 2004, so they've been with me for basically my whole adventure here into square bases. I'm very happy to have them in the army, even if they look a little dated. Moving on to the front here, we have on the left my Ogre Warlock with the loot. In the middle is Nomargarok, and on the right we have my Banner the Griffin Warlock. Obviously I had a third, more in keeping butcher model with the other ones, but this Warlock was done many years ago for a friend of mine's Ogre army as a commission, and I just decided I didn't want to paint another model, so he looks close enough, he looks fine. So, enough about him. Oh, I did, if you look at that right-hand machete he has, that's because I broke the sword. So, it looks fine, I think. It looks okay. Most people don't notice unless I point it out. So, anyway, moving on to the 2 middle guys. There's a few things going on here. I really like to add texture into my cloth, especially if I'm going for a quote smooth skin. This skin is not super smooth, but it is two brush blended. I don't like there are brush strokes in it, but they're not supposed to be intentional. Now the brush strokes in the leather and in the coarse fiber that I use for the pants is intentional. I work with a lot of stippling when I'm doing leather right now. I just think it adds something interesting, and honestly, it's just a lot faster. And when I'm doing the cloth, I decided to do cross hatching as my highlighting method, just to make it, again, a bit more interesting and to try to break apart the model, as otherwise we have a lot of like tones next to each other. We have that warm brown right next to that warm skin, and then the skin itself is washed with this blue, which is right next to the turquoise. And while I want harmony, I don't want too much. And Games Workshop models are notoriously easy to paint, but hard to master. So if you push a little, basically what I mean by that is that unless you want to put a lot of time into it, if you want to use these advanced ideas, it's going to get messy unless you really think about it. And hopefully I've done that with the what is it, the bone protrusions that they've gone with there, the scarification. I decided to add a bit more of that red skin, that irritated skin, just because I think it looks weird when people make it just completely healed, right? Like, that's too big of a wound for that. So, I don't know. It adds a bit more interest. It draws your eye towards these bone features. It's a good idea in general, I think. Not a perfect idea, but an okay one. Moving on. Oh, in the right-hand corner, you can see the beginning of the Grakagamok model I have, which is just an Ogre man-eater with a mace. He's literally the last model, and in fact, one that I'm painting as I speak. So, bit of foreshadowing there. Over here, we see my 3 regiments of Berserker Braves. Now, these guys, the tan ones, as in the lower right-hand corner, and the back guys, these were painted a long time ago, just simple dry brush, and I'm not super happy with how they looked. But this was a commission in 2000 diggity 8, so you do what you do. The 3 with the colder skin is more what I'd go for now, where I gave them an undertone. So I sprayed them with a zenithal paint to give them a nice gradient from black to white, working more towards the face with the white and more towards the black with the center of the model, so it would draw you towards the face, so I could work mostly with washes. A lot of people, as a small tangent, a lot of people get confused by washes because of Games Workshop's, what was it, Devlin Mud and all those paints, because they labeled them as washes. Washes are just thinned down paint, people. You can use them for any number of things. You can use them to tint models. You can use them to layer with models. You can use them for shading. You can use them for highlighting. Wash just means thinned paint, right? It's a product rather than the technique. The technique of washing, as people generally think of it, is a mixture of shading and tinting, which I do use G-Dub washes for. They're very good for that, but just keep that in mind. Anyway, the ones that I did are obviously closer to the cold spectrum, as I think it looks better, and I think it matches the army better. With the basing, you can see, yeah, it's a bit hard to make out, as again with the basing I was trying to figure it out as I went. So I've got brown in the dirt while I have a cold blue on any of the rock pieces, so the bark or the slate or whatever. But this gets a bit muted, as when I put down my snow flock, it would not cover that brown. That burnt umber was a bit too dominant, excuse me, to cover with the snow effect. So instead, I gave it a quick spray with white paint over it, which ties the bases together, but wasn't exactly great for the overall effect. So, I'm happy with how it turned out, but I'm not ecstatic, right? It's a solid C, I guess I would say. Maybe a little lower. I would say, not to get too much on a tangent, but the models I painted here in terms of my personal ability are probably between a 4 and a 6 out of 10. So I'm happy enough with that. Anytime I get that 50%, that's an okay army, and everything above that is great. Moving on, we see some old models. In the middle, we've got, I believe he was called Scrag the Slaughterer, and then we have 4 completely green stuff and Plasticard. I think they were man-eaters to begin with. Again, these were part of a commission for another person. So these guys, honestly, I added them to the army just because I didn't want to paint anything more, but also they give me, people like fancy conversions, so they give me those little extra hobby points, which are just so important. I love the mixture of I love best overall. It's one of the things I missed most about playing Games Workshop games when I spent so much time playing War Machine and games like that. Is I like the idea of celebrating people who master the hobby and master the competitive aspect, the play aspect, right? So I think, and my thoughts on sportsmanship can go to another day, but I really like the idea of pushing yourself both as a painter and as a player. So involving units like this, which so much love was poured into them. Granted, again, 10 years ago, but still a lot of love poured into them. And why not put them in the army? They're fine. Here we see the list I am bringing. At least I think it's the list. It's one of many of this general permutation. So I have the Horde of Warriors. I have the 3 regiments of Braves. I have a Horde of Hunters there. That is new and different. I have 2 hordes of Boomers. One with Wrath. One with Healing Brew. 2 Warlocks, 1 with Circlet of Blood, 1 with Banner of the Griffin, 2 Red Goblin Bigots, Grakagamok, and No More Grok. Now, I don't think this is the list I'm actually going to be bringing. The list I'm going to be bringing is probably the one I've been playing in the battle reports, which is to say, no Hunters, Grakagamok's Finest Braves instead of them, and then I have the Brew of Strength on the Warriors instead of, obviously, on the Hunters, because Finest Braves can't have it. And then my Boomers don't have Chalice of Wrath. They have nothing. No Circle of Blood either. That will be the loot, just to get that hot extra piercing on the Boomers. This was a list I was messing around with at a friend of mine's recently. I didn't get a chance to play it out, but honestly, it was just me trying to shoehorn what I've learned about ogres into the models I already have painted. It doesn't quite work. It's not. My biggest problem with my list and with this list and with the list I just described and the list I've been playing is that it can't really protect itself, or at least I can't make it protect itself on the flanks. I get flanked a lot. I push forward too far. I have no Pathfinder, so on and so forth. Also, I'm just not that fast. I'm used to Games Workshop ogres, which are speed 6 is a big deal there, right? It's 1 faster than elves. Here, it's the same speed as elves, which is significantly worse. So, I don't know. Definitely messing with the list, and in fact, over here you'll see my next concept, which is a bit different. I have I still have the Berserker Braves and the Warlock package. I like those things. I like having the +3 to cast on the Lightning Bolt. I like the Drain Life. I think that's excellent. I like No More Garok, which I took. Instead, I took the 5 points more expensive to get Drain Life instead of the I can only cast in the combat version, which is the Warlock with Inspiring Talisman. I took the Aura of Heroism, which is, it's a niche spell instead of giving him the Banner of the Griffin because I put it somewhere else in the list. But most importantly, that's the back bit. It's the bit I'm saving from the list right now. I like how the Warlocks have performed, even though they don't roll well. It's different from their performance. And I like the way that the Berserker Braves have performed. They're a great backfield or midfield piece, which is to say they don't really do anything impactful until turn 4 or turn 5. And they have great unit strength. I also decided to put them down with some shooters with the Blessing of the Gods. Ogre shooters are an excellent group, especially in a horde. They're great backfield pieces, just threatening the board with, 5+ range, Pierce 2, especially with reroll 1s to hit. And then they also can tear shit up in combat. A lot of times, when I'm playing ogres, I need something to finish an elite unit, like Vampire Knights, or what's the unit of the dinosaur horde that salamanders have. Just any of those relatively tough units that hit hard, right? The real, not Death Stars, but real ball breaker units. Sometimes I just need something to put a decent amount of damage, maybe like 6, onto them to really get that kill. And shooters are great. It's the same thing as I use the boomers for now, only they're backfield, so they're participating a bit more with their shooting rather than the boomers who just move up and get charged. Moving on, I decided to add the chariots with the Hell on Wheels. I think that's a really cool idea. I have a lot of mounted ogres, although I've sold quite a few, so I'm not sure how many I have left, but I still have quite a few. The double regiment plus the horde, you only need the regiments, but I think the horde really adds something to it, especially with the caterpillar. And then the warlord with Banner of the Griffin, so he has rallying 1 due to Hell on Wheels, and because the Banner of Griffin, he has rallying 2. That puts these that horde of chariots at an 1820. Defense 5, that's rough. Oof. Plus 65 points on my Ogre Warriors for, what is that, plus 2 speed, plus 6 attacks, +1/+1 nerve, and then plus 2 thunderous, and that is excellent. Granted, they're much bigger frontage and width, right? 50 by 100 versus 120 by 80, but I definitely think the chariots are worth it, and I'm eager to test them out, although I might be testing out some new armies soon. But anyway, this is sort of where I see the army going. The triple big gits are an excellent little bit of chaff. I like the fact that they can throw out bow shots when they need to, just to try to put a wound on a wizard, maybe with a nonsense spell like Martyr's Prayer. But mostly they're just chaff to go die. I like the Warlock package, that mostly because I don't see people running it. I like to be a little bit different. And then I am eager to try out these chariots, as my biggest problem with ogres has been their lack of Pathfinder and or their lack of speed, right? I don't mind walking through terrain when I walk 8 versus walk 6, right? It's that lack of 2 inches versus, that's what she said, the lack of 2 inches versus the lack of march. Especially my horde has caterpillar, obviously. It's just, it's so good. I like the massive amount of nerve that they have. I like that. I'm disappointed a lot of times while playing my ogre army, this permutation, because I get outpaced by so many armies. And I thought originally when I built it that the boomers would sort of make up for that, right? They can move forward 6 and shoot 12, which means they had an interdiction of 18, which is slightly better than the chariots do. But a lot of times, because there's only 2 units of them, people bring so many flyers, they get double charged. 1 gets charged, 1 gets charged, or 1's out of range, or they're just too easy to mess with their interdiction. So instead I prefer the chariots, who can just take a charge and deliver one. Like, even if you charge them, they lose their thunderous, but they still hit you on a 3+, they've got crushing, they've got brutal. Just so good, so many attacks. So I'm eager to try this out. We'll see how I do this weekend, and until next time, if you've got any questions, suggestions, thoughts, feel free to leave them in the comments. I always read them. Love to hear from you. Alright, later.